You know, I don't spook easy, but this one got to me. I was doing a late night haul through the Midwest, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. One of those long, quiet stretches of road where you feel like the only soul for miles. It was around 2 a.m., that dead part of the night when even the world seems to fall asleep. Just me, the hum of the engine, and miles of empty road. The air was cold, really biting, and this thick fog was rolling in, hanging low and making everything look strange in my headlights. Not just normal fog. This stuff was heavy, clinging to the ground, making it feel like I was driving through some kind of ghostly soup. I'm used to quiet nights, but there was something different about this one. Something heavy. I was so focused on the road, I almost didn't see it at first. But then up ahead, maybe 100 yards or so, there's this figure just standing in the middle of my lane. Right in the headlights, like he's waiting for me. I slowed down, heart starting to pick up a bit because, let's face it, that's weird. At that time of night, in that place, nobody's just hanging out on a back road like that. As I got closer, I could make him out better. Guy looked rough. He was wearing this ratty, beat-up coat, hands hanging at his sides, just staring at me. There was something in his eyes, though, like, I don't know how to describe it. Blank, almost empty. I've seen all kinds of strange folks out here, but this guy, he was different. I stopped the truck maybe 20 feet from him, engine idling, waiting to see if he'd move. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring like he could see right through me. I'm not one to get rattled easy, but something about that stare made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So I rolled down the window a bit and called out, "Hey, you all right?" Nothing. Not a flinch, not a blink. Just staring. I thought maybe he was lost or in trouble, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off. So I started edging the truck forward a bit, figuring maybe he'd get the hint and step aside. But instead, he took a step toward me. And that's when I noticed how he moved, kind of jerky, like he was limping, but not like an injury. Just wrong. I backed the truck up a few feet, feeling this deep, gut-level unease. I actually thought about just swerving around him, but I couldn't get past that feeling in my gut. That's when he lifted his hand, real slow, and pointed right at me. I'll tell you, I felt a lot of things out here on the road, but I don't think I've ever felt the kind of chill that ran down my spine in that moment. Then he spoke. Just one word, but I swear it felt like it echoed in my head. Help. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to get out, like he was drawing me to him somehow. But every single instinct was screaming at me to stay put. I reached for my phone to call someone, maybe the cops, I don't know, when there was this sudden bang on my driver's side door. I just about jumped out of my skin. I looked up, and he was right there, face pressed against the glass, inches from mine. His eyes were locked on me, empty and cold, like he was looking right into my soul. His hands were all scratched up and dirty, fingers splayed across the glass like he was trying to claw his way in. That was it. I threw the truck into reverse and gunned it, backing up fast, barely keeping control. When I was about 50 feet back, I stopped and looked around, trying to catch my breath. And he was gone, just like that. No sign of him. 1 second he's there, next second he's vanished. I got out, which looking back was probably a terrible idea, but I had to see if he was real. The ground was soft from the rain, and I could see footprints, deep ones, like he'd dragged his feet, leading right up to where I'd stopped. But here's the thing, the track stopped. No trail leading away, just stopped. I didn't waste any more time. Jumped back in the truck, locked the doors, and got the hell out of there. Now here's the part that still messes with me. A few days later, I was at a truck stop near that same area, fueling up. Another driver and I started talking, and we got on the subject of strange road encounters. I told him about the guy I'd seen, just kind of testing the waters, and the look he gave me, he said I wasn't the first to see him. Apparently, a few other drivers had spotted a man around that same spot. Always late at night, always with that same look, like he's lost or looking for something. Turns out there's this old story about a hitchhiker who died on that stretch years ago. Hit by a semi and left there until morning. People say he's still out there, looking for help. I laughed it off at first, but man, I don't know. I can't shake it. Every time I pass through that stretch now, I find myself glancing at the side of the road, half expecting to see him there, staring back at me with those hollow eyes. Ever get that feeling when you're alone, like there's someone watching you?
So, this happened a few years back when I was on one of my regular meet and turn shifts. You know, where one driver hauls a load halfway to a specific spot, meets another driver, and then they take it the rest of the way. It was a routine thing, and the halfway point was always the same. A secluded parking lot smack in the middle of nowhere with miles of forest around. It was usually dead quiet there, and honestly, that night was no different. The air was cold, and this light fog was rolling in, hanging low over the ground and making everything look super eerie in my headlights. I'd arrived early, so I thought I'd just park, kick back and grab a quick nap before the other driver arrived. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I swear, the darkness felt thicker than usual. It was almost like it was pressing in on my windows. Anyway, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the wind through the trees lull me to sleep. But just as I was starting to doze off, I heard this loud thud on the back of my trailer. It jolted me awake instantly. I sat up, heart pounding, and checked my mirrors but couldn't see anything. Figured it was just a branch or maybe a raccoon messing around back there. So I took a few deep breaths, shrugged it off, and tried to settle back. Then the thud came again, louder this time, almost like someone was pounding on my trailer. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, and I knew I wasn't going to relax until I checked it out. So, I grabbed my flashlight, climbed out of the cab, and made my way around to the back of the trailer. The fog was pretty thick, and the forest around was dead silent, not a single rustle. I thought I'd see some animal or something, but there was nothing there. Just as I was about to head back to my cab, I noticed something strange on the ground. Right behind my trailer was a single muddy footprint, fresh and weird looking. It wasn't exactly barefoot, but it was close, like something with claws had made it. That was enough for me. I stood up fast, felt a shiver run down my spine, and headed straight back to the cab, locking the doors as soon as I got inside. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but then I heard this faint scratching noise. It was like nails on metal, coming from the side of my truck. I turned off the interior lights, hoping I could see better outside. And then, in my side mirror, I caught a glimpse of something moving just beyond the trailer. It was low to the ground, quick and stealthy, but before I could really focus, it was gone. Just then, the radio crackled, and the other driver said he was about 5 minutes away. That was a relief. I told myself I was just spooked, letting my imagination get the best of me. So I radioed back, trying to sound calm even though my nerves were shot. A few minutes passed, and then I heard it again. Light, quick footsteps, like someone was running around my truck. I stayed completely still, straining my ears. I looked out the window and saw something dart just out of reach of the headlights. It looked like a figure, crouched low, almost gliding along the side of my trailer. Luckily, at that moment, the other driver's truck pulled into the lot. I can't tell you how relieved I was to see those headlights. I flashed my high beams to let him know I was there, and he pulled up next to me. We both got out, and I finally felt some of the tension ease. But just as I was about to tell him what happened, he looked down and pointed at my trailer. "Hey man, what's with the muddy handprints?" he asked. I looked where he was pointing, and sure enough, there were muddy smears all over my trailer, like someone had been pressing their hands against it. And mixed in with the handprints were these long scratch marks, as if claws had been scraping down the side. Trying to shake off the weirdness, I helped him get the load hooked up. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was like something was hiding just beyond the reach of the light, waiting. Kevin must have noticed I was pale as a ghost because he gave me this strange look and asked if I was okay. I just laughed it off, though I was anything but calm. Once we were both set, Kevin honked goodbye and drove off, and I headed back to the highway, feeling a huge sense of relief to be out of there. But about 10 minutes down the road, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and my heart just stopped. In the faint glow of my trailer's taillights, I saw this shape crouched on top of the trailer, gripping the edges, blurry in the darkness, but definitely there. I couldn't believe it. I gripped the wheel, sped up, hoping the wind would knock it off. But whatever it was, it held on, barely shifting as I picked up speed. Panicked, I grabbed the radio and called Kevin. "Hey Kev, I think there's someone on my trailer. Something's not right." There was silence for a second. Then Kevin's voice came through, shaky. "Mike, there's no one on your trailer. I can see you from here. Nothing's on top." As I glanced back in the mirror, still seeing the shape holding tight with what looked like sharp clawed hands. My stomach dropped. And then, as if it sensed my fear, the figure seemed to melt into the darkness, leaving only a few muddy streaks on the back of the trailer. My heart finally started to slow as I convinced myself it was over. But then, I noticed something on the dashboard. The message "passenger door ajar" was blinking. I froze, my eyes darting to the passenger side, but the door looked firmly shut. The message kept blinking. I reached over, pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. That's when it hit me. I hadn't checked the sleeper compartment. Slowly, with a sinking feeling, I turned, catching a faint whiff of wet earth and something rotten filling the cab behind me. That night has stuck with me ever since. Let's just say I'm a lot more careful about stopping at isolated places at 3 a.m. I heard this story from my friend Greg, a long-haul trucker with decades of experience. Greg's not the type to scare easily, but this one night back in 2009 still makes him pause. He'd been running a route from Houston to Kansas City, a straight shot with plenty of wide-open highway in between. He preferred these night drives. Less traffic, open roads, and time to think. It was a crisp November night, just after midnight. Greg had just crossed into Oklahoma, miles of empty highway stretching in both directions. He noticed a storm gathering in the distance, dark clouds illuminated by flashes of lightning. As he was nearing a desolate rest stop, he felt the urge to pull over for a quick break and some fresh air. He hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour, but he figured it was better to stretch his legs before the storm hit. Greg pulled his rig into the empty parking lot, which was barely lit by a single flickering lamp near the restroom building. The rest stop was deserted and eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the distant rumble of thunder. As he stepped out, he noticed an old sedan parked off to the side, its headlights off, but its brake lights faintly glowing, as though someone had just stepped out of the car. Greg didn't think much of it. Truck stops were weird places, after all. He took a deep breath, stretched, and walked toward the restroom building. But as he got closer, he noticed something strange. The sedan's trunk was slightly open, and inside, he could just make out what looked like a blanket with something lumpy underneath it, something that seemed oddly person-shaped. He shook off the thought. It wasn't his business, and he didn't want to find out. But then he heard something, a faint, almost desperate whimpering sound coming from inside the trunk. Greg's blood ran cold. He looked around, the emptiness of the parking lot making the situation feel even more surreal. He thought of calling the police, but his phone was back in his truck, and he didn't want to leave the spot if someone was in immediate danger. Summoning his courage, he took a few steps closer to the trunk, straining to hear. Then, suddenly, the restroom door creaked open, and Greg instinctively took a step back, trying to act casual. A man emerged, dressed in dark clothes, his face shadowed under a baseball cap. He looked directly at Greg, a hard, calculating stare that seemed to cut through the darkness. Greg offered a nod, keeping his expression neutral. The man didn't respond, but walked straight to the sedan, slammed the trunk shut with a force that made Greg jump, and got into the driver's seat. As the sedan's engine roared to life, Greg noted the car's plates, making a mental note to call the cops as soon as he got back to his truck. The sedan peeled out of the lot, tires screeching as it sped off into the night. Shaken, Greg returned to his truck, locked the doors, and immediately called 911. He explained the situation to the dispatcher, detailing what he'd seen and describing the man and the sedan as best he could. The dispatcher assured him that they'd send someone out to check the area, but there wasn't much else Greg could do, so he reluctantly got back on the road. A few hours later, just as dawn was breaking, Greg saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He pulled over, and a state trooper approached his cab, asking if he was the one who had made the call. When Greg confirmed, the trooper told him they'd found the sedan abandoned just outside a small town about 50 miles up the highway. The car was empty, and there was no sign of the man he'd described. However, what they did find was chilling. The trunk contained blood-stained blankets and a few personal belongings, but no victim. Greg felt a wave of dread, but the trooper thanked him for calling in and went on his way, leaving Greg to finish his haul in silence. For the next week, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed something critical that night, that someone was still out there, either the man or the victim. But here's the twist. 2 weeks later, Greg was parked in another truck stop when he noticed something strange. Taped to the back window of a dusty old truck was a missing persons poster. The face staring back at him was eerily familiar. The same face he'd glimpsed that night in Oklahoma, the man with the baseball cap. Only now, the poster described him not as a suspect, but as a missing person who hadn't been seen since early October. Shaken, Greg asked the cashier about it, and she told him that the man had vanished while on a road trip with his family. His wife and daughter were found alive but shaken, claiming they'd been rescued after being locked in a trunk. The husband had gone for help, and he never returned. Now they feared he'd fallen victim to something sinister. Greg realized he'd witnessed only part of the story that night. Somehow, the man was both a victim and a suspect. The man in the cap had saved his family, yet he'd vanished without a trace. It was as if something dark and supernatural had intervened, leaving only shadows of truth and a mystery that would haunt Greg's dreams for years. And to this day, when he drives down that same Oklahoma highway, he can't help but glance into the darkness, wondering if he might see that missing man's face, watching him from the shadows,